The Ridley Report.
Erica Chenoweth is with us. She is the author of a book, which you've been paging through there, Mark, Why Civil Resistance Works, and a co-author, actually, co-authored with Maria Stephan. Erica, are you there?
I'm here.
Sorry about the last name mix-up there. Thanks for coming on Free Talk Live here tonight. So Mark was raving about this book to me, and he said we've got to have Erica on with us.
Yeah, it's remarkably, it's not very often that I'm chasing after authors asking them to be on Free Talk Live, but I did do that.
Right, normally they pound on your door.
Yeah, and I tell them no. And
right.
But this book, I felt, first off, the title caught my attention. Why Civil Resistance Works, the Strategic Logic of Nonviolent Conflict. Now, we on Free Talk Live talk about this kind of thing on a pretty regular basis, and it seems like there's been some buzz going around. There was a New York Times article that came out that kind of said something similar to this. It obviously wasn't as researched as your book, but could you make the just sort of the underlying argument for the book?
Sure. What we're arguing here is that when we take a look at the history of violent insurgency versus nonviolent resistance from 1900 to 2006, what we see is that the historical record shows that nonviolent resistance is strategically superior to armed conflict. And what we mean by that is that when we just look at the categories of regime change campaigns or anti-occupation or self-determination movements, nonviolent campaigns have succeeded about twice as often as violent insurgency. So
that's a pretty big track record.
Yeah, that's twice as often.
It's huge.
Now, what can you describe nonviolent civil resistance to me, just to make sure that we're clear on what that is?
Right. So nonviolent, or what we're calling civil resistance here, is a method of prosecuting conflict in which unarmed civilians are actively applying sanctions or withdrawing cooperation from their governments. So it's kind of like civil disobedience en masse.
So boycotts, strikes, protests, organized non-cooperation, all these things, many of them are considered illegal, right?
Exactly, right.
Okay, so it's not that people are acting within the law because, well, the bureaucrats and politicians will write whatever they want into law.
Walk up and down on the sidewalk. We need to be in constant movement. If we continue to stay here, then we will contact the Manchester PD.
It's that they're acting outside of the law. They're just not generally picking up arms.
Well, they're acting on what's right, or what they consider to be right, without using violence. Is what it sounds like to me.
Yeah. So there's usually some kind of unifying objective there. Say they're feeling oppressed by the regime, or they are being occupied by a foreign power, or something like that. And basically, yes, they're using organized methods of conflict. Really, they're nonviolent methods like strikes, boycotts, protests. Those are weapons that can be applied against an opponent. But most people think of weapons as violent, and we're making the claim here that there's this whole dimension of conflict that's largely ignored because it doesn't appear in the media as much, or it doesn't make a huge blast or whatever, but it's much more effective.
So now when you're talking about regime change, does it result in the fall of the dictator, or does it result in sort of better conditions for the slaves?
Yeah, so that's actually pretty interesting. We weren't sure that we were going to find anything on that. It does typically result in the fall of dictators, but the thing that was so striking is that in one chapter of the book, we report these findings that when nonviolent resistance has occurred in a country, not even just when it actually succeeds, but just occurs in a country, that country is much more likely to transition into a more kind of democratic country in the long run than one in which a violent insurgency has taken place.
Define democratic for me.
Yeah, so we use a very conventional set of measures for that because we're kind of talking to a political science audience with that metric. But what we're looking at is just a standard political science definition, which is that there are fairly representative institutions, that there is popular contestation of power, that is, there's a competitive elections where people aren't actually going to be intimidated into voting a certain way. There's some civil liberties that are broadly enjoyed. There's separation of powers. So it's kind of a standard definition, even though, of course, it has problems.
Sure. I mean, it's difficult to know. There are a lot of quote unquote democracies out there, and they do tend to span the gamut from free to mildly oppressive. But most of them are not sitting at the bottom of the list as far as oppressive regimes. And I don't think there's ever been that I can think of a war from a democracy to a democracy. Like, there's no democracy on democracies wars. At least they're very unlikely.
How far back, by the way, Erica, does this book kind of look at as far as nonviolent movements, civil resistance movements?
Yeah, we go all the way back to 1900.
Okay.
And we're looking at well over 300 cases. And we use some statistical techniques to analyze those. But, the book presents them in a fairly summary way so that it's accessible.
Would you like to learn how to shoot videos the Ridley Report way? Then head to RidleyReport.com and shoot me an email. I can arrange to meet you for a class, provide you a 4-page instructional summary, and turn you into a Ridleyographer. Remember, shoot me an email at RidleyReport.com. At Ridleyography, I am the bomb.